Greetings! Michael Didier here. Thank you for joining us. Last week, do you remember what happened? Yehovah shall appear this day to you. Yehovah appeared. It was after chapter 8. It was after chapter 9. Actually, it was 9. Now that I think about it, it was the end of 9. Do you remember what happened in 8 and 9? We were consecrating the priests. We had a 7-day process in which they were consecrated to Yehovah. And then on the 8th day, they went through one more process. They gave a burnt offering and a sin offering for Israel's seed. And then Yehovah appeared. Oh my goodness. He not only appeared, how did he appear? Remember, we said in smoke. He came in the smoke. And then fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering. Wow. Amazing. This was a great day for Israel. But in chapter 10, we saw that it wasn't a great day for Aaron and his sons. He lost 2 of his 4 sons because they brought strange fire, Zor fire, before Yehovah that he didn't command them to do. Oh my goodness. Joy, great, exceeding joy as Yehovah comes to us, and great sorrow that these boys were killed. All Israel grieved. The brethren, it was actually Aaron's, I was trying to figure it out this morning, it was Aaron's and Moses' cousins who came and brought the dead boys from before Yehovah's face. I think it was outside the tabernacle. They were still outside the tabernacle. They wouldn't have been allowed inside the tabernacle, I'm sure. Had to be before Yehovah's face that they died. Well, I want to give us just, I think it's like 7 verses is all from Yasher. Here it is. This is covering these really 8 days. You remember it was 7 days of purification, and then on the 8th day, which was the first day of the first month of the 2nd year after we came out of Egypt, Yehovah appeared to us. It was that day that the boys died. Here it is. And in the 12th month, in the 23rd day of the month. You know, I would not have seen this in Torah had I not seen it here in Yasher. There's some confusion here, but there's some great light here too. It says, Moses took Aaron and his sons, and he dressed them in their garments, and he anointed them and did unto them as Yehovah had commanded him. And Moses brought all the offerings which Yehovah had on that day commanded him. Moses afterward took Aaron and his sons and said to them, for 7 days you shall remain at the door of the tabernacle, for thus I am commanded. You know what? We have seen already. There is no tabernacle on the 23rd day of the 12th month. This has to be at the door of the tent. What tent are we talking about? We're talking about the tent of meetings. It appears that there is a courtyard with the tent of meetings in the courtyard. But we're going to take down the tent and we're going to put up the Mishkan. The Mishkan is what generally should be translated as the tabernacle. In this, they're going to translate it as the sanctuary. Now they're going to go back and forth. Let's take a look at it. I want you to see this. At the door of the tent, it has to be. And on the 8th day, being the first day of the first month in the 2nd year from the Israelites' departure from Egypt, Moses erected a sanctuary. And Moses put up the furniture, look what it says, put up all the furniture of the tabernacle and all the furniture of the sanctuary. Huh? How's that possible? What are we talking about? Doesn't quite make sense, does it? because we've been consecrating, we didn't see it really yet, but we have been consecrating this altar, the bronze altar, for the 7 days that we were being that the priests were being consecrated to Yehovah. And Moses called to Aaron and his sons, and they brought the burnt, the olah, and the kata'ah for themselves and Israel's seed, as Yehovah had commanded Moses. Remember, a burnt offering is going to be wholly gone. Only thing that's going to be left is the hide, probably when it's being made for Israel's seed and the priests. It's going to be burnt up outside the camp. If the kata'ah is being made for the priests and for all of Israel's seed, it is going to have blood, which is going to be brought into the tabernacle, the tent in this case, and all the flesh, which would normally be eaten by the priests, is going to be burned outside the camp. Again, where we leave the ashes. Apparently, we failed to do some of this at the end of chapter 9. We talked about it last week. And there was a little bit of a brouhaha between Moses and Aaron. It seems that we forgot to bring the blood in, but then we didn't eat it. And Moses felt like, well, if we don't bring the blood in, we should eat it. Aaron said, well, if we didn't bring the blood in, why add to it by doing another thing wrong? He said, would that be acceptable to Yehovah? Remember that? Well, look at this. On that day, the 2 sons of Aaron, these are the 2 older sons, Nadab and Avihu, took strange Zoar fire and brought it before Yehovah, who he had not commanded them. And fire went forth from before the face of Yehovah and consumed them. And they died before the face of Yehovah on that day. You know, I had to ask myself, why is it strange fire? What is Zoar about this fire? I think that perhaps, and I haven't been able to find any direct instructions about this, but is it possible that the incense altar is always burning before Yehovah? And they're supposed to get the coals for their censers from there. Burn the incense, put the incense on in the temple, the tabernacle. Remember, the tabernacle is up right now. We do have a tabernacle up. This is the day. It's later on in the day. I wonder if that's why it was strange fire. But it was beyond that. Because it's stuff that they were doing things that he had not commanded them. He never told them to come into the tabernacle to burn incense to Yehovah. We don't add to Yehovah's word. We don't subtract to his word. Then on the day when Moses had completed to erect the sanctuary, see, they're calling it the sanctuary, the princes of Israel, probably the Nasi, Israel's Nasi, began to bring their what? Bring their korban, I guess, before Yehovah for the dedication of the altar. Well, we're going to see the things that they brought when we get to Numbers. This is actually going to be in number 7. Yeah, number 7, that we're going to talk about what they brought. It was a lot of stuff, but it was beyond just animals. It was gold, it was silver, it was oil. Well, we'll see. We'll come to that later. Let's go on with what we were going to cover today. We're going to pick up today in Leviticus 11. Here it is. It's all about clean and unclean meat. You know, I looked at my blog today. I have clean and unclean food. I wish I wouldn't have used food. I guess I used that for SEO, search engine optimization, and getting people to my blog with that. And it seems to be working, I guess, all right. But I wonder if I would have said clean and unclean meat, if I would have been better. So much retrospect. You know, I'm learning and growing as I write these things. And sometimes they're just not quite now what I would like them to be. All right, it says, now Yehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, it says, speak to Israel's seed. Who's he speaking to? He's always speaking to Israel's seed, his Ezra men, the called out men who have come into covenant with him. Remember, the Ger is the Gentile who leaves the kingdom of his birth, joins himself to Yehovah's people, just like they did when we came out of Egypt. We, the Ezra men, came out 600,000 strong, but we had a mixed heads of households that went with us. Those were the men. Those are the ones who are becoming the Gers, who are going to dwell with us. He's speaking to Israel's seed. Israel's seed is going to teach then the Ger, who dwells with us. He's going to teach the servants who dwell with them. He's going to teach their women and their children. Yehovah never speaks to my woman. Sorry, honey. Yehovah speaks to his Ezra men. They then speak to the women. We're going to see things as we go through these chapters. Yehovah is always speaking to his men, his heir, his spiritually born men. He says, these are the living things which you may eat from among the behemah from all the behemah that are on the earth. Ooh, these are the living things which you may eat among all the behemah that are on the earth. Among the animals which divide the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing their cud, that you may eat. I guess I said that wrong. Among the animals, the behemah is the word that we're talking about right here. Whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, and chewing the cud, that you may eat. Those are the two things that we've got to remember. Dividing the hoof, or divided hoof, and chewing the cud. They have multiple stomachs. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud. But look what it says, or those that have cloven hooves. So we've got to have both chewing the cud and cloven hooves. Not one or the other. This is what this is all about. The camel, because he chews his cud, but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. Let's talk about clean and unclean briefly. I put clean foods and unclean foods. We're talking about tahor and tamei foods. Oh, there it is right there. Tahor and tamei foods have nothing to do with foods being washed. No, we're not talking about washing with water. Clean and unclean has nothing to do about washing with water. There are times when we're unclean and we can wash, bathe, and be unclean until evening, and then we're going to be clean. But that's not what we're talking about. We're unclean not because we didn't wash with water. We're unclean because of something which we did. These are unclean to us. Things that belong to the realm of tahor are indeed useful in presenting and promoting the image of Yehovah in the earth. That's our job. The things that Torah teaches, which belong to the realm of tamei, unclean things, are not acceptable for promoting the image of Yehovah in the earth. By learning to make these distinctions, we determine our orientation towards Yehovah and our destiny. Look what he told Israel's seed in just the last chapter. We're in 11, this is 10. He says, do not drink wine or intoxicating drink. He's talking to Aaron and his remaining sons, 2 sons. Thou nor thy sons with thee, when thou go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest thou die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between the holy and the profane. Holy and the profane. And between the unclean and the clean. Interesting way of saying that. Positive, negative, negative, positive. A, B, B, A. We'll see some of these kinds of things when we get into chapter 15. And between the unclean and the clean, that you may teach Israel's seed all the statutes which Yehovah has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. Do we want to be closer to Yehovah? I want to be close to Yehovah. But if we come to Yehovah being unclean, we're actually going to do damage instead of good. This is why the priests teach us, so that we don't come before Yehovah and do that damage. I put, as we learn and begin to walk in his statutes and ordinances, we remove stumbling blocks and barriers that interfere and weaken our connection with the Creator. While at the same time, we more fully manifest his image in the world. And isn't that what our job in this life is all about? Yes. Our job is to be a light shining in the world. By manifesting Yehovah's image and kingdom on the earth for all to see, we become his light shining in the darkness. But you know what? This chapter troubles me. There's a lot of people out there who have an understanding of this chapter, a decent understanding of this chapter, but they fail to understand chapter 17. Remember, he gives us pieces by piece. He talked about the Olah offering. Then he gave more statutes about the Olah offering and more statutes about the Olah offering. And he builds on that in the same way he builds on this. Don't build your ideas about clean and unclean meat from one chapter. We've got to see the big picture. I challenge you to do that. He says, the rock, high rock, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, it is unclean. The hare, because it chews the cud, but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. I wonder if the rock, high rock, is a sort of goat that just doesn't have cloven hooves. Does it have paws? The rabbit has paws. He's given us an example of a rabbit with paws. Chews its cud, but it has paws. It doesn't have cloven hooves. What does the rock, high rock, have? I would like to know. I just wonder if there's another example. This is an example of one with paws and one with like camel hooves or a horse hoof. All right, well, that's some thoughts. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. Who is you? Are we talking about the Gentiles? Are we talking about the U.S. citizens? How about the Canadians? How about the South Africans? No, who's he talking to? Speak to Israel's seed. Folks, we've got to understand who Israel's seed is. Look what he says. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. Here's Isaiah 65 and 66. He says it in both of these two concluding chapters in Isaiah. Here's the first one. A people who provoke me to anger continually to my face, who sacrifice in gardens and burn incense on an altar of brick, who sit among the graves and spend the night in tombs. How about the Skull and Bones Society? Who eat swine's flesh and broth of abominable things in their vessels. Who say, keep to yourself. Do not come near me, for I am holier than thee. These are smoke in my nostrils, a fire that burns all the day. In the very next chapter, he says pretty much the same thing. Look. For behold, Yehovah will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger and fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword Yehovah will judge all flesh. And the slain of Yehovah shall be many, those who sanctify themselves to purify themselves. This is what we're doing. We're just talking about, who keep to yourself. Do not come near me, for I am holier than thou. Those who sanctify themselves instead of following Yehovah's instructions to go to the gardens after an idol in the midst, eating swine's flesh and abominations, and the mouse shall all be consumed together, says Yehovah. Again, who is he talking to? He's not talking to the world. They're already going down. He's talking to Israel's seed because he wants them to stay holy and to be holy as he is holy. He says, these are the things you may eat of all that are in water. Not in the water, in water. In water. Whatever in water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or the rivers, that you may eat. Wow, that's going to exclude an awful lot of things. Shrimp, lobster, mollusks, oysters are very common things that we eat. But here in the South, we got catfish. Oh, catfish is a big deal here. Doesn't have scales. It's got fins, kind of, but it doesn't have scales. He says, these you may eat of all that are in water. Whatever in water has fins and scales, that's what it's about, that you may eat. He says, but all in the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. All the living things that are in the water that do not have fins and scales, they are to be an abomination to you. Abomination. You know, did he talk about abomination up here? This is the first time that he's using this word. I want you to see a couple things here. The word that he's using is this right here, shikatz. Shikatz. Detests, filthy. It is supposed to be filthy to Us. Us. Israel's seed. We think of it, I know I have always thought of it as being filthy to Yehovah. But there's more to be seen here. Because if it's going to be filthy, detestable to us, it means that we have to take on the attitudes that Yehovah has. Remember, it's all about tahor and tamei, the clean and the unclean. The clean is going to put forth Yehovah's image into the earth. The unclean is going to be negative towards that. Well, there's a lot of gray area in here. Can we be gray and still bring Yehovah's image to the earth? Wouldn't work for the priests, would it? And we, Israel's seed, are supposed to be a holy priesthood. No, we've got to learn more. Here it is. Let me go through this, shikats. It says, a masculine noun meaning detestation, an abomination, a detestable thing. Chiefly, this Hebrew word marks those things that are ceremonially unclean and forbidden. I want to read this to you, ceremonially unclean or forbidden. I guess I just have a challenge with ceremonial unclean. They're forbidden. They're unclean. Unclean is unclean, ceremony or not. Here's another word. This is tu'eva, an abomination. This seems to be a much stronger word used by Yehovah. Feminine active participle, properly something disgusting morally. That is, as a noun, an abhorrence, especially idolatry, or concretely an idol, is tu'eva. Here he says, you shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the price of a dog to the house of Yehovah your Elohim for any vowed offering. For both of these are an abomination to Yehovah your Elohim. It looks to me like we can bring not only gifts of animals. Shalamim, remember we talked about the shalamim for the vow. We can also bring money for the vow, it looks like. But not money that comes from harlotry, not money that's going to come from the price of a dog. What's the price of a dog? The wages of a harlot and the price of a dog. We're talking about a man who lies with another man for money. Both are wickedness before Yehovah. If a man lies with a male, as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Abomination seems to be much more severe. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. This is again talking about the fish of the sea. Whatsoever in the water does not have fins and scales, that shall be an abomination to you. Whatever does not have fins and scales, and these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. So now we're talking about the birds. No, we had chewing cud and cloven hoof for the behemoth. For the fish, we had fins and scales. But look at what he does for the birds. He really takes another, and maybe it's because there's so many different kinds of birds, but he takes another tact altogether. He gives us those birds which we are not to eat. instead of telling us the things that we are to eat or how to examine those. He says, and these you shall regard as an abomination among birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. What are we talking about? He's going to tell us. The eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, the falcon after its kind, every raven after its kind, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, the seagull, the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the fisher owl, the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, and the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron after its kind, and the hoopie and the bat. So what we have to do is we have to ask ourselves, it says after its kind. What kind of birds are we talking about? It seems to me we're looking at birds that are eating the dead. We're looking at birds that eat unclean meats, mice, rodents of all sorts, snakes. It seems to me that's what we're looking at. The birds that we can eat may be things like robins. They don't fall into these categories. Chicken, duck. Some might argue that a duck, they want to make it about feet. They'll say, well, a duck's got the same kind of foot that a seagull has, or the same kind of foot that what was the other one, jackdaw? Heron has. Well, maybe a heron does it. I'm thinking about the blue heron. They're dwelling in trees. They probably don't have a duck-shaped foot. But that's what they'll do. They want to make it about the foot. They want to make it about what they eat. And while I gave some suggestions about why these particular birds might be unclean, I don't think we can go that way, because he doesn't say, if they only eat clean things, you can eat them. He doesn't go there, does he? He's giving us some things that we're not supposed to eat. And he's saying after their kind in many cases, not even all cases. I eat chicken. Slaughtered a chicken just a couple weeks ago. Meant to do one yesterday, but just didn't have time. Next, bugs. Behemoth, four-legged animals. Fish, birds, and now bugs. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. An abomination to you. You know, there are people out there who want to find reasons why they should not consider Yehovah's word as important for their lives. Both men and women. And they will go to verses like this, where it says, on all fours. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Well, you know what? There's not a single insect that has 4 legs, and this means 4. But I think there's another meaning that we're talking about. I would have to look at it as this. They creep on all their feet. They walk on all their feet. All fours. That's the only way that I can understand how this means. He says, yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours. There it is again, all fours, on all its legs. I think, yeah, look at this. These you may eat. This is different translations. Here's the living, literal translation. Only this you may eat of any swarming thing which flies, which goes on all fours, which has legs above its feet, to leap with them on the earth. Yet you may eat these things of the flying, swarming thing that goes on all four. There it is, all four again. This is my translation. Yet you may eat these things, any flying, swarming insect that crawls, which have above their feet legs joined to leap upon the earth. Flying, swarming, crawling, jointed legs that leap is the criteria that Yehovah is giving us for deciding which insects we can eat and which insects we can't eat. He says, these you may eat. These you may eat. Oh, talking about what some of these words are. Swarming. They swarm. They don't swarm all the time, but they swarm. They jump. They go on all fours. I put yes, 4 as in the number. What's wrong here? No insects have 4 legs. All right. I guess that's enough of that. These you may eat. They say the locust. This is the New King James Version, which that's what I always teach out of. The locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. Well, what are we talking about? Can we eat crickets? Do crickets swarm? When was the last time you saw a swarm of crickets? And well, a locust is a grasshopper. A locust is a grasshopper. Not all grasshoppers are locusts. They jump, but they don't fly. They don't swarm, but they jump. Look at what some of the translators say. Locust, bald locust, beetle, grasshopper. Here is a... Well, I bet does a beetle have legs that allow it to leap on the earth? Does it swarm anywhere but in the movies? Many translations say grasshoppers, crickets, katydids. In addition to locusts, but grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids, well, they do have wings, are not flyers. Their wings are more for sound. And when was the last time anyone dreaded a swarm of katydids or crickets? Oh no, please don't come by me. No, it's always locust, isn't it? Well, here's arba. Here's a bunch of words that they're using. The first is locust, an abundant swarm. Seems to be swarming. These are things about swarming. Maybe that's their biggest thing, their biggest attributes. It says from high jumping, salam, chargol, locust, kargav, again, locust. Here's an interesting translation, which I have to go and understand. It says, this is Erdman Bible. These of them may ye eat. The swarming locust after its kind, the devouring locust after its kind, the charcoal locust after its kind, and the kargav locust after its kind. Here's Rotherham. They did exactly the same thing. Swarming locust, devouring locust, charcoal locust, chargav locust. Look what it says in Yasher. We went through this before, but here it is again. It says, and Yehovah sent and brought numerous locusts into Egypt. Well, look at what they are. Kassel, salam, cargol, and cargolah. I wonder if that's a different spelling on some of the ones that we were just looking at. Compare those. Cargol, there's the salam, cargol. They seem to be different kinds of locust. They don't have the arba, and they spell the last one, kargab, differently. But I wonder it's supposed to be kargav. You never know what happens in translations, but it appears to me that these are locusts. Locust. Look at it says, which devoured all that the hail had left remaining. Then the Egyptians rejoiced at the locust. Oh, good, at least we got locusts. Why? Because they can eat it. Although they consumed the produce of the field, and they caught them in abundance, and salted, I left it out, and salted them for food. And Yehovah turned a mighty wind of the sea, which took away all the locusts, even those that were salted, and thrust them into the Red Sea. Not one locust remained within the boundaries of Egypt. He took even the salted ones that they were glad about, the extra food they had, and he took them. Well, locusts are the things that we get to eat. I put an article together, I think it was locust. These are all describing different forms of locusts. But all other flying insects which crawl shall be an abomination to you. By these you shall become unclean. Hear that? These things make us unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The carcass of any animal which divides the foot, but is not cloven hoofed, or does not chew its cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean. Camel, pig, and whatever goes on its paws, among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, that crawl on all feet, those are unclean to you. Whoever touches any such carcass shall be unclean until evening. Apparently, the carcass of a clean animal, whoever eating it, is not going to make us unclean. Only the carcasses of the unclean animals are going to make us unclean. Makes sense. Whoever carries any such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. And these also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth. He's going to give us more things. The mole, the mouse, the large lizard after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whatever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Does that mean if you kill a fly and you touch the fly, I usually try to use Kleenex, drop it down the drain. Does that make you unclean? It may. How about gnats? Will they make you unclean till evening? How far do we take this? I know the Jews are really uptight about it. Gnat gets into your drink, it's going to be unclean. Anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean. whether it is any item of wood or clothing or skin or sack, whatever item in which work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. An earthen vessel. Remember, we were talking about having the abominations in our vessels in Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66. Into which any of them falls, you shall break. Hear that? We're not supposed to have these unclean animals in our vessels. And whatever it is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food which water falls becomes unclean. And any drink that they may be drunk from it becomes unclean. And any drink that may be drunk from it, I guess the vessels. This is why we're talking about breaking it, huh? And everything on which a part of the carcass falls shall be unclean, whether an oven or a cooking stove, it shall be broken down, and for they are unclean and shall be unclean to you. Wow. What does that mean? Are we talking about, what do we call it, a ceramic cooking stove? Is that what they were using in those days? What if we have an oven? We've had unclean things in our ovens. Are we supposed to replace our ovens? Some of those things become pretty costly to do, doesn't it? How far do we take this, I guess this is part of crying and sighing for the abominations that are being done in the land. Father, I want to get it right. I don't want to be half-hearted. I want to be wholly yours. I want to be holy as you are holy. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern in which there is plenty of water shall be clean, but whatever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. But whatever touches such, I guess if a dead animal gets into your well because it's moving water, or your spring, it's moving water, it's going to be okay. It's not going to contaminate it. Can't break your well, can you? And if a part of any such carcass falls on any planting seed, which is to be sown, it remains clean. Let me look at this note here. Water source is not polluted by a dead animal. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Then we're talking about the seed. It remains clean if a carcass falls on it. But if water is put on the seed, and if part of any carcass falls on it, it becomes unclean to you. So the seed is going to be unclean if it's wet. And if any animal which you may eat dies, he who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. This is not an animal that we eat, that we killed. This looks like an animal that we eat that dies. Is going to be unclean until evening if we touch it. He who eats of its carcass. Now this is animals which we may eat. He who eats of its carcass shall wash his hands and be unclean until evening. So we can even eat that particular animal that dies of itself. But it's going to make us unclean until evening. He also who carries its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And every creeping thing that creeps on the earth shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten. Let me see if they, yeah, shekets. We're still talking about shekets. It shall be filthy when we're talking about filthy to you. Shall be an abomination. It shall not be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, whatever goes on all fours, and whatever has many feet among all creeping things that creep on the earth, these you shall not eat, for they are an abomination. You shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creeps, nor shall you make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. How do we get defiled? We're unclean, but how can we be defiled? Is it possible that being unclean and going before Yehovah is going to defile us? Because there's something more to it than this, isn't there? Make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. Perhaps because of them. For I am Yehovah, your Elohim. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. That is the way. Remember, the priests are teaching us between the holy, the Kodesh, and the profane, between the clean and the unclean. So when we come before Yehovah, we're not going to be destroyed. For I am Yehovah, your Elohim, you shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I think we're talking about bugs again. Is it possible that all the stuff about the cistern is all about bugs too? Maybe it is. I want more light. For I am Yehovah, who brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your Elohim. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. That's what he says in Leviticus 19. He's talking to Israel's seed. Speak unto the congregation of Israel's seed, and say unto them, Ye shall be holy, for I am Yehovah, your Elohim, are holy. Remember, we were talking about the congregation of Israel's seed being Israel's seed and the Ger who dwell with them. Moving on. This is the Torah of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters and every creature that creeps on the earth. To distinguish between unclean and clean, between the animals that may be eaten and the animals that may not be eaten. Well, that's clean food. I've got lots more to say in my articles on my blog concerning clean food. Tahor. Oh, we got a nice group here today. Joe, I'm so glad you made it. Ryan's back. Great. Sally's here. Yippee. All right. Going to my blog. Here's the clean and unclean food. Here it is right here. This has clean and unclean. Then I talk about Peter's dream, because a lot of people, because they want to build their theology on the New Testament, they will cite Peter's dream. Yehovah says, everything that is on the thing shall be clean to you, but they don't realize that he's using an analogy and that he's talking about men. Because the Jews treated the Gentiles as if they were unclean and wouldn't associate with them at all. Well, how do you teach them? How do you be alive to them if you can't associate with them? So Peter says, I've never had an unclean man in my house. Well, it's about men. It's about men. He's telling them to go see those 3 men, 3 or 4 men, I forget what it is, or maybe they're coming to him, saying, let them in, talk with them. Anyway, I talk about that. I talk about animals, fish, birds, bugs, and then something very significant, and this is a 9-part series. It's meat sacrificed to idols. Meat slaughtered to other Elohim is really what we're talking about. The meat that we eat, even though it's clean, is killed in such a way that it is not acceptable to Yehovah. We've got to learn this. I about became a vegetarian after I saw this. I still eat the chicken, still eat some other things, but fish, but it's very limited. Well, we've got more to learn. Let's keep pushing to learn more. Let's go back to the scriptures. I guess we're going to move on to chapter 12 of Leviticus. This is women after childbirth. Then Yehovah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to who? Israel's seed, saying, if a woman has conceived, you see how we're going to teach the women? Then say, if you have conceived and bore a male child, bore a male, it doesn't even say child, bore a male, bore a zakar, then she shall be unclean 7 days. Zakar, there's the male. We're going to see in the next portion, it's going to be nekabah, the female. Then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her customary impurity. She shall be unclean, as she is in her nadah, her time of the month. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. They're getting circumcision into this particular chapter. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor, look what it says, come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. No, that makes no sense if we know Yehovah's word. It's about coming near the sanctuary. She's not going to come near the sanctuary because she's unclean, and there's men who are coming there to come in to appear before Yehovah's face. And if she touches one of their animals, if she touches them, now they're going to be unclean. Don't go near the sanctuary is what he's telling her. You're unclean until the days of your purification are fulfilled. Then you're going to come near the sanctuary. But if she bears a female child, here is the word for that. It's called nekabah. Here it is, nekabah. Female. A female. If she bears a female, there's no child there. Then she shall be unclean 2 weeks. 1 week for the male, 2 weeks for the female, as in her customary impurity. And she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days, twice as long as she was for a male child. So the male child was 8 days plus 33 days. No, 7 days plus 33 days, 40 days. And this is 2 weeks, 14 days, plus 66 days, 80 days. When the days of her purification are fulfilled, whether for a son or a daughter, a zakar or a nekabah, she shall bring to the priest a lamb of the first year, as an olah, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a kata'ah. Where does she bring it? To the door of the tent of meetings. Where are we at? Is she going into the temple? No, she's going to stay outside of the courtyard. But the priest is going to meet her there. It says, then he shall offer it before Yehovah. Did you hear that? Remember, when men are bringing it, the men are going to kill it before Yehovah's face. I said, kill it, shakat. That's what he's going to do. He's going to kill it before Yehovah. Then he shall bring it before Yehovah and make a covering for her. Not atonement, covering, a covering for her. And she shall be clean from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who has borne a male, a zakar, or a female. Look what it says. And if she is not able to bring a lamb, she may bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for an olah and the other for a kata'ah, the breach, closing the breach. So Yehovah shall make a covering for her, and she shall be clean. Well, that's a nice short chapter, isn't it? Well, now we've got the law of leprosy. Carissa challenged me this morning that maybe there's more of these things going on than what leprosy is a pretty big catch-all, I guess is a way of saying it. And I think there's a lot of skin things going on here that are brought on by Yehovah that is being, the word that's being translated is this word here. Zarata. Ra'at. Got to have the accent on the second syllable. Very unusual for Hebrew to have it on the second syllable instead of the last syllable. Ra'at. And the other word is a plague. A plague. Talk about that some more. When a man has on his skin, I was going to say then, are there, if this is a big catch-all, leprosy, when I think of leprosy, what do you think of leprosy? Do you think of white spots on your skin? Don't you think about fingers falling off, turning numb, nerves dying and falling off, noses coming off? That's what I think about when I think of leprosy. Is it possible that this Zara'at is something besides leprosy? We just call it leprosy. I wonder. Maybe there's a lot more going on, and leprosy is the end of this. Perhaps. Where does leprosy come from? Who brings it on? Let's talk about that a little bit in a minute here. It says here they're describing leprosy. This is probably Webster. A foul cutaneous disease. That's a cutaneous, is below the surface of the skin, appearing in dry, white, thin, scurfy scabs, attended with violent itching. It sometimes covers the whole body, rarely the face. It says when a man, this is Adam, and Adam has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore. Like a leprous sore. That's the word we're looking for right now. This Zara'at, Nagah is the word that we're looking for there. A leprous spot. A leprous sore. I think I liked. I'll have to take a look. Then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. The priest shall examine the sore on his skin of his body. And if the hair on the sore has turned white, the hair has turned white. What do you do with gray-haired guy? I wonder. And people who actually have white hair. If the hair on the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin of his body. Remember, we're talking about a subcutaneous. It is a leprous sore. A leprous sore. There's different kinds of leprous sores, it appears to me. Then the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. Tamei, there it is right there, tamei. 4. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body, and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore 7 days. I think this is a man or a woman. It does say Adam up there. And I think you can make a case. It doesn't say the Adam. If it said the Adam, then I would say it's the man. But this says Adam. And now he's taken about the priest shall isolate the sore 7 days. They said the one who has the sore 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And indeed, if the, let me look at this. Plague, leprous plague. Yeah, that's what I wanted to have, leprous plague. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore appears to be as it was, the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him another 7 days. So we had 7 days. Now we're going to have a second 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day. And indeed, if the sore has faded, and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. Do you know the power that the priests have? They have such an awesome responsibility to know Yehovah's word and to keep the camp clean. Their word seems to be final. The priest shall pronounce him tahor. It's only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab should at all spread over the skin, after he has been seen by the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. You're going to have to go back. And if the priest sees that the scab has indeed spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When a leprous plague is on a person, then he shall be brought to the priest. And the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the swelling of the skin is white, swelling of the skin. This is another type of leprosy altogether. This is a swelling on the skin is white, and it turned the hair white, and there's a spot of raw flesh in the swelling. It says it is old leprosy. Old leprosy. Chronic za'ra'at on his skin. On the skin of his body. The priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. Doesn't even have to isolate him. You're unclean, bud. And if leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of the one who has the sore, from his head to his foot, wherever the priest looks. Listen to what this says. I don't get it. I'm going to read it again. And if the leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and the leprosy covers all the skin of the one who has the sore, from his head to his foot, wherever the priest looks, then the priest shall consider, and indeed, if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean. who has the sore. It has all turned white. He is clean. Huh? Does that make sense to you? Like I say, this is an awesome responsibility that the priests have. When raw skin appears on him, he shall be unclean. But if he doesn't have the raw skin, if he's all white, he's okay. And the priest shall examine the raw flesh and pronounce him to be unclean. For the raw flesh is unclean. It is zara'ah. Or if the raw flesh changes and turns white again, he shall come to the priest. So now it's healed. It's still white, but it's not raw anymore. And the priest shall examine him. And indeed, if the sore has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him clean, who has the sore. He is clean. You know, this reminds me of what's going to happen in chapter 15. Let's remember where we're at right now. In chapter 15, we're going to talk about human emissions, normal and unusual discharges. Zav and Zuv. Zav is the normal discharge. A woman has a normal discharge. A man and a woman who are having sex together have a normal discharge. They're going to be unclean until evening, but there's an abnormal discharge. And the person who has an abnormal discharge is going to be separated from their people. This leprous sore has fluid attached to it. And I wonder if that is part of the reason why they are pulled out of the camp and separated as unclean, because we're going to see in Numbers that the leprous person and the unclean man or woman in her zuv and the one who touches a dead body are all going to be put out of the tent, out of the camp. Can't be in the camp. I think that's interesting. And just thinking about this open wound, I wonder if that would be considered a zuv. We'll talk about zuv and zav probably definitely next week. All right, let's go back to where we were. 17. Pronounces unclean. If the body develops a boil. Here's a body developing a boil. That's the word for boil. Chakin, a burn, inflammation, ulcer. In the skin, and it is healed. And in the place of the boil, there comes a white swelling or a bright spot, reddish white. Then it shall be shown to the priest. Reddish white. Try to highlight these colors in a little bit different so I can see them. And if when the priest sees it, it indeed appears deeper than the skin, and its hair has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean, where we are, deeper than the skin, and the skin has turned white, or the hair has turned white. It is the leprous sore, which has broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there are no white hairs in it, and it is not deeper than the skin, but has faded, then the priest shall isolate him 7 days. And if it shall at all spread over the skin, you notice how many of these have to do with the spreading of this disease? A leprous plague is going to be something that is going to spread. And if it should spread at all over the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore, a leprous plague. But if a bright spot stays in one place and has not spread, it is a scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if the body receives a burn on its skin by fire, a burn is something that we got to be aware of. And the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish, white, or white. Reddish white or white. Then the priest shall examine it. And indeed, if the hair of the bright spot has turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, it is leprosy broken out in the burn. Therefore, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore, a leprous plague. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there are no white hairs in the bright spot, no white hairs. Isn't it interesting? It's all about the white hairs. And it is not deeper than the skin, but has faded. Then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days, and the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it has at all spread over the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous plague. It's spreading again. But if the bright spot stays in one place and has not spread on the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn. The priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is a scar from the burn. Now we're talking about if a man or a woman has a sore on the head or the beard, man or woman. This is the ish. Here's the ish. Here's the ish. I guess I gotta open this a little bit wider. Here's the ish. Ish. Or the woman, the isha. How come he didn't say that above? How come now he's saying man or woman? Perhaps because of the beard? Perhaps. If a man or woman has a sore on the head or the beard, then the priest shall examine the sore, and indeed, if it appears deeper than the skin, there is in it a yellow hair. There's that yellow hair again. Oh, that's a yellow hair. It was white hair before, wasn't it? Then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is scaly leprosy, another kind of leprosy. Leprous eruption. It is a leprous eruption. Leprous eruption. Here, this is Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. He says for this particular word, eruption, a disease of the skin which breaks open, drawing out liquid. Again, there's the liquid that we're talking about. It has a yellow hair, not a white hair. It is a leprous eruption of the head or the beard. But if the priest examines the leprous eruption, and indeed it does not appear deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the one who has a scale who has the eruption 7 days. There is no black hair. Wouldn't you think that if it had a black hair, that would be a good thing? No black hair. No black hair. What does it have then? Does it not have a yellow hair? It has a gray hair. No black hair. And on the seventh day, the priest shall examine the sore. Well, let me see what we have here. Erupting spot. On the seventh day, the priest shall examine the sore. And indeed, if the eruption has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the eruption does not appear deeper than the skin, he shall save himself. But the eruption he shall not shave. Shave himself, but he's not going to shave the eruption. Probably because they want to see what the hair looks like in it. And the priest shall isolate the one who has the eruption another 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest shall examine the scale, the eruption. And indeed, if the eruption has not spread over the skin and does not appear deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale should at all spread over the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him. And indeed, if the eruption has spread over the skin, the priest shall not seek for a yellow hair. He is unclean. Just having it go deeper than the skin at this point, on a beard or on his head. But if the scale appears to be at a standstill, and there is black hair grown up in it. Look at, now it says there is black hair grown up in it. This is what I would have expected to see up above. It said there is no black hair grown up in it. The scale has healed. He's clean. And the priest shall pronounce him clean. Again, if a man or a woman has a bright spot. Here's a man or a woman. No beard this time. Why man and woman? Why not above man and woman? Why does it say Adam? Oh, I want to know these kinds of things. If a man or a woman has a bright spot on the skin of his body, specifically bright white spots. Bright white spots. Then the priest shall look, and indeed, if the bright spot on the skin of the body are dull white, it is a white spot that grows on the skin. He's clean. It says, as for the man whose hair has fallen from his head, he is bald, but he is clean. He whose hair has fallen from his forehead, he is bald on his forehead, but he's clean. And if there is on the bald head or the bald forehead a reddish white sore, it is leprosy breaking out on the bald head or on his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine it. Do we have these things today? I guess I don't see a lot of it. Then the priest shall examine it, and indeed, if the swelling of the sore is reddish white, let's highlight that. Then the priest shall examine it, and indeed, if the swelling of the sore is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, as the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man. He is unclean. Let's see what word they use for that. Man. He's a leprous man. Ish. Leprous man. He is unclean. All right. Ish. Man. He is the leprous man. Ish Zara'at. He is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His sore is on his head. shall be torn. No, now the leper on whom the sore is, his clothes shall be torn on his and his head bare. His clothes shall be torn and his head bare, and he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. Cover his mustache. What if he doesn't have a mustache? Unclean, unclean. Why would he do that? He's doing that because he's with the priest. And now he's leaving the priest. Did the priest come and see him, or did he go to the priest? Let's find out. So as the priest shall examine it. It doesn't say whether he comes to the priest or the priest comes to him. He's going to say unclean, unclean. Why? Because he doesn't want other men to be made unclean by his uncleanliness. Again, it's not about being dirty. It's about being not in the image of Yehovah. He shall be unclean all the days he has a sore. He shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. This is what we're going to see later on in Numbers. The dwelling place is going to be outside the camp. Sometimes we can get to that by going to the ancient Hebrew lexion, TSK, the scriptural knowledge, something scriptural knowledge. Now here's what it says. Command Israel see that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, that's the zuv we were talking about, and everyone who becomes defiled by a corpse. Here is the first inclination or first inkling that we're seeing that this man, these people who have the zara'at on their body are going to be separated from the camp. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Now they're going to switch gears yet again. They're going to talk about garments. Still talking about naga zara'at. Also, if a garment has a leprous plague. Now look at that. Same words, only instead of leprous sore, now we're talking about a leprous plague. Why? Because it's not, they can't say a sore for the garments. So why don't they make it all leprous plague? I think they should. Also, if a garment has a leprous plague in it, whether it is a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is in the warp or the woof of a linen or wool, whether in leather or in anything made of leather. Doesn't sound like they had a whole lot of choices in the clothes that they could wear. Wool, linen, leather. Do our choices make things better or worse for us? You know what? I wish I had linen garments. You don't sweat in linen garments. Linen garments last much longer. Woolen garments also have good things. One's coming from the flax, the other's coming from the sheep. Whether it is in the warp or the woof, the warp and the woof. Here, I put it down here. Here is the warp of weaving. A masculine noun referring to warp, a woven material. It refers to the set of threads running lengthwise in the loom and crossed by the woof or the weft, the intertwining of the cloth. So when you have a loom, you're going to have the spindle, you're going to put it through, and it's going through the warp. And the thread that you're putting through is the woof. Push it down, push it through the other way. Same thing. Warp and woof. And if the plague, remember we're talking about in a garment now, if the plague, they translated that nicely, if the plague is greenish or red in the garment, or in the leather, whether in the warp or the woof, or anything made of leather, it is a leprous plague and shall be shown to the priests. Here we have something that's in our clothes. You know, clothes probably were a lot more valuable in those days. I guess if you have a linen garments, well, even a woolen garment, they're pretty valuable these days even, aren't they? The priest shall examine the plague and isolate that which has the plague 7 days. And he shall examine the plague on the 7th day. If the plague has spread in the garment, either in the warp or the woof, in the leather or anything made of leather, the plague is an active leprosy. It is unclean. He shall therefore burn that garment in which the plague, whether warp or woof, in wool or linen or anything of leather, for it is an active leprosy. The garment shall be burned in the fire. Can't burn the people in the fire, but the garment's going to get burned in the fire. If the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or the woof or anything made of leather, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing in which the plague, the nagah again, and he shall isolate it another 7 days. The priest shall examine the plague after, I like that, the plague, after it has been washed. And indeed, if the plague has not changed in color, though the plague has not spread, it is unclean. So even if it doesn't change in color, even though it hasn't spread because it did not change in color, it's still going to be unclean. You shall burn it in fire. If it continues eating away, whether the damage is outside or inside. If the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has faded after washing it, then he shall tear out the garment. He shall tear out the garment, whether out of the warp or out of the woof or out of the leather. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the warp or the woof, or in anything made of leather, it is a spreading plague. You shall burn it with fire. Well, he shall tear it out of the garment. So are we going to have a hole in our garment? Would that be acceptable? Apparently it is acceptable. Guess it depends on what kind of garment it is. I want to know more. If it appears again in the garment, either in the warp or the woof, or anything made of leather, it is a spreading plague. You shall burn with fire that which is the plague, on fire that in which is the plague. All right. And if you wash the garment, either warp or woof, or whatever is made of leather, if the plague has disappeared from it, then it shall be washed a 2nd time, and it shall be clean. This is the Torah of the leprous plague in the garment of wool or linen, either the warp or the woof or anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. You know, this is one of the few places where it actually uses clean and unclean in the same verse. Don't see that very often. Well, it's 1:42. I really wanted to get through the next chapter today. We obviously did not. Cleansing the leper, we're going to have, how is this leper going to be cleansed? I think you're going to be surprised to see that. We're going to see a plague in the house, a leprous plague in the house. Again, leprosy, I think, is a catch-all. Carissa, thank you for reminding me of that today, that leprosy and leprous plague really are talking about a lot of different things. We're going to finish this chapter with these words next week. This is the law of the leper's sword. This is where I thought I was going to be at the end of that last chapter. Leper's plague. And scale for the leprosy of a garment, for a house, for a swelling, a scab, and a bright spot, to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law of Zara'at. Well, I'm really looking forward to next week. Even we have to still go through this stuff for the cleansing of the leper in the house and that. But the very next chapter is going to be about human emissions. I think you're going to find it very, very interesting. And then the one after that is going to be the Day of Coverings, Yom Kippurim. All right. Well, hey, thank you for joining me today. We'll see you again next week, all right? Love you tons. Bye now.